SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to our next lecture, which is adaptive reuse, rehabilitation of heritage structures and historic areas. In the last lecture, we have talked about infill or the new buildings in old settings. Today, we will talk about if there are certain structures or areas also sometimes which has outlives its older original use, then we have to find an alternative use to the structure. We have to find means if we are convinced about that it's a significant of significance, that area has a significance or the structure has a significance. So, we will talk about that what is the adaptive reuse and the rehabilitation of structures and areas or precincts. I am quoting from Dave Clark in Building Education, adapting an older building for a new use. It's inevitable that structures will age and outgrow their original functions. With changes in technology and lifestyle, construction and design are constantly updated to meet modern demands, and older structures are left in the wake of change. Those sensitive to history may prefer to restore older structures to their former glory. However, cost often make this plan unrealistic. An alternate concept is adaptive reuse, a process of retrofitting old buildings for new uses, which allows structures to retain their historic integrity while providing for occupants' modern needs. So, this is what he says, and this summarizes the gist of the adaptive reuse or rehabilitation, though we also have to understand that we have talked about grading, that all types of heritage structures cannot be adaptive to new use, but according to the grading, according to the provision and significance, it is one of the most viable option to continue the historic fabric, and especially if that is has a significance, it has a townscape value or some other significance, and it is in a good structural condition. Sometimes repair and other things are necessary, but we will see some of the examples. Let us talk about some of the example. This is San Francisco Ferry Building. This was a large steel framed building built in 1892, and when it was built, it was very active as a transport ferry terminal. That time the Golden Gate Bridge wasn't constructed, so it was the only means of transport, and every day a lot of people used to use this ferry terminal for crossing the bay. Over the time, it lost its significance. The bridge came up, and not many people were using the ferry as a transport, and it became in a very rundown condition, neglected, and then there was a flyover which came up. So, there is a long history behind that. But now it is transformed into a retail and restaurant space on the ground floor that focuses on local sustainable products. So, you can see here that there is the old structure, and now it has been converted into a very important food market on the ground floor. And what is this now? It is now a combination of transit, office use and unique retail makes the ferry building a destination for locals and tourists alike, stimulating the waterfront. So, it has become, and it was like lying vacant and neglected for a long time. It is only some of the people and the organization, architects, town planners, they came together and it thought that it must be given a new identity, and it will give an identity not to itself, but to the city as a whole, the San Francisco. It will become a gateway. So, some new uses are put in, and while putting the new uses, it also thought about that it shouldn't just become a tourist destination, it should also involve the local people. So, it is something which is a local sustainable product. There is a farmers market every Thursday which is outside that. So, there was had a dream, and that dream has come true, and because of that the ferry terminal has acquired a new meaning, a new function, and it is not only for itself, but it is acting as a gateway to the city. And because of ferry terminal, in the surrounding area or adjoining area, a lot of new activities are coming up. So, this is redefining its role, and it has got a new significance. And this is another example of adapting older building. This is a district, actually, a older distillery district in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, which is a commercial and residential district in Toronto, Ontario. And Canada, in the main city, is near the waterfront. So, I am just in a very short, I am talking about the background. It was the Goodham and Worth, one of the largest distiller in Canada. The distillery facility on the Toronto waterfront was closed down in 1990s. There was again a tax evasion, some stories there, some facts and figures. It was not being able to. So, now what happened is that, but the structures were there. What is the normal usual way is to demolish the structures, use the very important valuable land for making a new areas, but it has not done that. They have decided. So, in 2001 the site was purchased by the Cityscape Holding Incorporation, which transformed the area district into a pedestrian oriented area and eventually converted into the distillery district, including the Young Center for the Performing Arts that opened in 2006. So, you can see here some of the older structures, they are still there, and most of them are there, and each one of them has been adapted to a new use. And not only it's, again I am saying, it also houses the artists, the local shop owners. It has become a destination for everybody and involving all the stakeholders. Now, as you can see that it has become a destination area, dining, shopping, culture, events, a lot of things are happening, and you can see that how that old structure has become a vibrant. What is the gain of that is that not only it is keeping the history of that area, but it has some sort of a new identity which possibly could not have been able to be achieved through the new construction. It would have, but it will have a different character. It would not talk about, or it will not sort of relate on to the history of Toronto, a very important part. Let us talk about some of the, so there are many such examples where not only individual structure, but areas have been converted and adapted to the new use. Let us talk about some the Indian examples. This is a very recent one, actually very recently on the February 24th. This is a news, you can see a slice of Danish heritage restored, and you can see the Danish tavern in Srirampur. Now, just to give you a background, in West Bengal along the Ganges, on both sides of the Ganges, there are a lot of settlements from the Europeans. It is called Little Europe because the Danish came there, the French people came there, the Germans came there, Portuguese came there before the Britishers came and started Calcutta as their East India Company. So, each of the small places had a lot of that heritage of that places. There are outskirts of Calcutta, small settlements, municipality, and at one time this place Srirampur was known as the Frederick Nagar, named after the king of Denmark. And not only one structure, there was a government building, and it is also very important because there was a Srirampur college where William Carey and others, they really worked for the education, had the first printing press, the working on the Bengali script for the education. There is a lot of contribution of the people who settled there and worked for the education system, the governance and other things, and these are the remnants. Now they are very neglected, and now this is we will talk about the few structure. One is important is the Danish tavern. So, if you see the history, because it was based on that structure was lying neglected for a long time, nobody really knew the history of that structure. Not only one structure, there are many structures, I am talking about Danish tavern. Yeah, so there was a research which was helpful to find out from the old pictures and photographs and settlement that what was there, and then it was established historically that it was the tavern for which some references and writings were available, and one could identify that this was the tavern. You can see here the old structure which is there, which was lying in a very neglected condition. As I said, you can see the staircase was in a dilapidated condition, which has been earlier, and now it has been restored, and now it will function as a coffee house. That's very important. All people are waiting for that. So here you can see more clearly the local architect is an architect Monish Chakraborty, and he sort of that this was there were squatters, shopkeepers. It's a very dilapidated, as if waiting to be demolished, and this is what is looking now a beautiful tavern. It is still work as a coffee house, restaurant. There will be some guest houses. This is the interior, how it has been done. So it has got a new life. Now, how it was possible? Who paid for that? The main patronage came from SwayamPrabha initiative of the National Museum of Denmark. So, SwayamPrabha initiative was formed because of to help restoring and adapting some of the structures of SwayamPrabha, and the main people who are associated is the National Museum of Denmark, and under their patronage and guidance, and also the West Bengal Heritage Commission. I have talked about the act. The West Bengal is the only state in India which has a state-wise heritage act. So, they also have carry out the listing and other, and the Indian National Trust of Architecture and Cultural Heritage, they also took part in that. So, it's a combined effort, guidance, that this has been possible to do the adaptive reuse of this structure, very ancient structure. And as the continues, you can see the beautiful riverscape. What you can see, the restoration was going on. The renovation cost 5 crores of rupees. Now, borne by Real India, a private association in Denmark, which supports the philanthropic projects in the realms of architecture and planning, and the Department of Tourism, Government of West Bengal. So, you see, there is the NGOs are working, the public private partnership is happening, and then there is an international collaboration. So, all of this make it possible that such an initiative can be successful. Again, we can see here that I told you that this is not only that one structure, there are many structures in SwayamPrabha and the other townscape. We are talking about SwayamPrabha only. So, here you can see the government house, which is also almost nearing completion in West Bengal in SwayamPrabha only, and you can see the architects are there. The local architects is Gopal Sen, who worked on behalf of the West Bengal Heritage Commission, and also you can see the masons and the craftsmen who are there, who worked for the project. Their contribution is very valuable. They actually come from Murshidabad and work with lime and the original material. Now, Bentewolf, a project head for the SwayamPrabha initiative, and the consultant was architect Flemming Olund and National Museum of Denmark. So, you can see them that when the workshop the project was going on, and after the project, where they are standing in front of a newly restored old wall, and before and after, and this is almost nearing completion. The government, I hear that it will be converted into a museum of the Danish history, and they are the key intervention. When such thing happens, there are many other, there is the SwayamPrabha College, there is the place where William Carey used to stay there, and there are other temple structures, all which is a combination, a combined, which we call the shared built heritage. So, there are many more examples, and I am sure that this will not only have a piecemeal impact, but they will have an impact on the total SwayamPrabha. And there is also the church which has been restored by Monish Chakraborty, which got an award, very prestigious award. So, these are the things which actually show the people that these are the things possible, because the local people are always very proud of their place, but sometimes they do not know what to be done. So, it actually does, and the tourists, the local people, it can be used for the many structures. So, these are the in India also there are many there is adaptive reuse examples are going on. I have just mentioned 2 of them. And but what is important, that whatever you talked about an individual structure, we talk about a heritage district, what is important, as you say, that always the cost, financial case, that from where the cost will come. That is very important, and not only the cost, but also people talk about the gain, that if we demolish the structure, then the land and the new structure will have more floor area. Such consideration cannot happen in adaptive use. Cost is important, but you cannot really equate in terms of the floor area which can be generated. So, as I say, there should be a listing has to be done, that these are important, and then there should be some overall limitation and bylaws for that area, and then one can talk about that what are the possibilities and option. Arguably, the most important factor in the decision is to adopt an existing building is the cost. Nobody is denying the cost is important part. Whether the owner is private or public, it does not mean the government also will not think of the cost. Public or private, the budget always comes into play. So, one has to be very concerned, I mean one has to sort of think about that and work in a very judicious manner. But unless the actual goal is historic restoration. So, one has to first determine that the goal is historic restoration. I mean, demolishing a building and having a new structure and floor area, vis-a-vis that if we keep it, what is the cost? This cannot be equated. First of all, we have to be convinced that it has got its significance, it has got its value, and it is better to keep it. That is the first and foremost thing one has to say. It cannot be equated at par with any other structure. So, that is a very important part, whether we talk about the historic district, historic structure or pressing. Unless the actual goal is historic restoration for a treasured landmark, when restoration may cost more than the new building. Sometimes it not only may cost, it also requires a different types of expertise. Then adaptive reuse must be the more cost effective option, because just restoring it and keeping it like this, rather than that if you adapt it, it is possible, then that is the most possible option than rebuilding. And the ambience of the space, sometimes the structure quality, they may look very dilapidated, but most of the times the original materials are quite a good condition, the structures and others. So, there should be some guidelines for rehabilitation. So, we say that cost is there, but one has to first establish that this is important, this is significance, it is a treasured structure, precinct or a site. So, what are the guidelines? So, this is, you can see the tavern which is lighted and it is just complete. The guidelines for rehabilitation. First of all, we have talked about the ethics of conservation, is same thing, the minimal changes to a property's defining characteristics should be made. Defining characteristics, what are the characteristics which define the significance of the structure? It may be architectural, it may be historical, it may be aesthetics, whatever, that has to be first made very clear, and the documentation and condition mapping are a very important part of there. Even while working on it also, keeping the documents are very important. His historic character shall be written, preserving as much of the original fabric as possible. Again, the principle of minimum intervention applies there also. Wherever is required one can do, but also one has to think about as much as possible to go back to the original material, original construction techniques, because this becomes a part of the restoration project. We continue with the guidelines of rehabilitation, which is a park mansion in Park Street, Kolkata, which is not sort of a legally identified as a heritage district, notionally yes. So, there is a park mansion which is Park Street, which is originally a residential, now it is converted into commercial, partly residential, and some of the institutes are also there, which there is an inner courtyard. So, it is a beautiful building and it has been restored quite well. Such examples are there. So, we continue with the guidelines. The additions that create a conjectured or false history are not to be made. So, one cannot, even while adaptive reuse, though there can be a lot of intervention, but one cannot do a conjecture that possibly this was like that. Like in the Danish tavern also, they matched that with the original photograph, saw that what is happening, there may be some addition alteration later on. So, they also thought that what should be removed, what should be kept, what should be restored. So, each and every material is very important, every element or component is very important. So, though additions that have actually been made throughout a building's life should be preserved. As we say, we have already discussed that the all layers of history are very important until and unless it's very, by taking out something more important facade is or aspect is discovered or exposed. I have heard that in the Danish Tavern also there was a wall which came up later, and the architects has to decide how it will be interpreted. So, the people have to come and they have to understand that this is from a different period. So, we will talk about that interpretation later on. As much as possible, the building elements should be repaired rather than replaced. So, these are again following the ethics of conservation. As much as possible, it should be repaired. It may be painstaking, it may be little more costly, but still that is the ethics, because that is why we are doing it, taking this project after all. So, repaired rather than restored, and if an element cannot be repaired, then a replacement must be identical in appearance and material to the original. So, these are again some of the ethical principle or guiding principle which have to be kept in mind when we are talking about. We continue with the guidelines. Further buildings and their surrounding must not be harmed during the rehabilitation process, because sometimes we are making it some use where you need parking, we do not have to just put a garden to make it beautiful. Even in the setting, it is very important from the old documents, photographs and other, that what was the original setting. One has to be very cautiously working on that. Landscape architect's role is very important, landscape conservation architect. This includes the use of hard surface treatments. One should not, because whenever there is a historic structure, most of the time there will be the archaeological remains in the surrounding area. So, one has to be very clear about that. They should not damage the archaeological evidence or using irreversible connection methods for new addition. And one must remember, I have not shown this example, but sometimes it is also possible that you have to make a new annex or a new addition to an old structure. It never is, I mean, it is not, there is no rule that it has to imitate the old structure. Rather, we say that the new annex should actually be a new interpretation, or it should belong to today's age, but it should harmonize. It is almost like the principles what we talk about, the infill. Like here in, for example, if you see an old fort or a castle, it has been converted into an art gallery or art museum, and beautifully done. I am sure that inside is also beautiful, but it has kept not only the surrounding, it has kept the surrounding, and it has also used the original structure and the inner spaces and other things. So, it says that if a new work is to be made, such as an addition, it should be differentiated from the old, while still keeping with the original structures, architectural features and scale. So, that goes for you make a new wall, new annex, or maybe to make it more user friendly for the senior citizens, or for making it for the accessible to all, because it is a public building. There are certain, to make it fire resistant, probably it requires new additions. That has to be kept in mind. They have to be thought in a very creative way, and they are very important part of adaptive reuse. Structural aspects are also important. But adapting and reuse building, what are the final, one should understand that what are the final gain of this, that it is bypassing the wasteful process of demolition and reconstruction along makes adaptive reuse attractive. So, yes, there are historic architecture, but one also has to think that these resources, if they are, we are recycling a resource, if the resource is there, and rather than demolishing it and then making a new structure, we are reusing or recycling a resource, which is a space, structure and other thing, and that sort of takes away that wasteful process, because demolition also needs money. One has to think about that, and it is not very easy, but these are the. So, there are environmental benefits combined with energy savings. Most of this historic structure are very, their passive energy control is very important. They are almost there compared to the new structures. So, energy savings and the social advantage of repurposing a place with the valued heritage. That means, there is an old structure which has its original use, probably that use is no longer there. So, we are giving a new meaning, new life, new purpose to that, which also helps the surrounding area, the context. Make adaptive reuse an essential component of sustainable development. If you remember the history of conservation movement, I'd say that how it has shifted from monument centric approach to the area based approach, and very recently is talking about a sustainable development. These are generally, if you really talk about the energy preservation, conservation, the use, the passive energy, most of these structures are very good, and they are good examples of sustainable development. With new intervention, a little intervention, it can be retrofitted to a new use and a much more comfortable way. Again I am saying that it is not an use one has to be very sensitive. It cannot be how we treat the new buildings. One has to be sensitive to the particular challenges of the old structures. Historic building, finally, why it is important is the historic building provide a glimpse of our past while lending a character and serving a new practical purpose in modern community. And this is the finally the benefit of adapting old structures, areas or precincts to a new use. Here we can see many examples. There we see that is in Sydney, a carriage works, where a contemporary performing arts center for theatre, experimental dance and acrobatic theatre housed in the formal carriage workshops. So, because it had a lot of space, and that huge space, rather than again constructing the space which was a factory can become I have seen in Berlin that near the station there are a lot of go downs, and these go downs are now become a artist area, because nowadays the artists, they use a lot of animation, projection and other, they need a huge space. Rather than constructing the spaces, these go downs, they are converted into the artist space, and now it has become a very vibrant area and different environment and ambience which is given. You do not have to make it, you just retrofit that for the new use and others sometimes. So, even matching the new use with the old structure is very important, because we have to see that what that old structure's value significance, what it offers, what are the structural possibilities which are there. So, rather than changing it totally, facade retention is not a very viable option. It is viable in many of the cases done, but not a very desirable option. Rather than trying to use the space, the ambience of the space, suppose it is a beautiful roof, do not cover it with false ceiling, because then that experience ambience sort of is loses. So, one has to find, if one sort of takes an effort or gives an effort to see that what is the most befitting use of that space, keeping the significance, it probably one of the best way of not only keeping our history alive, but also maintaining it, because the maintenance will be a part of that new use, but also giving us a glimpse of our history. But so we see a old factory can become an apartment complex, a rundown church may find a new life as a condominium, an old office building may be transformed into a vibrant retail factory. But please remember, the grading is very important. The very important structures are not generally adapted, it is the grade 2, grade 3. So, these provisions are there when the listing is done, that which other structures can be adapted to the new use. For example, this is an example from Pune, the Khushru Irani Design Studio. Is artfully restored an old structure, combining the contemporary detailing with much of its original splendor, partly to be used as their studio and a space for events open to the community, and it definitely stands out as a different type of office space and others. So, there are so many options which are possible, so many examples are there. So, in many ways, an adaptive reuse project can invigorate a community by meeting the changing needs of the population. So, we are not talking about a museum city or a museum place or a frozen preservation, we are talking about the change, a change which is sensitive, which is contextual and which is slow, is not drastic. So, have a dialogue between the two. In that way, the adaptive reuse is very important, because then it does not become a white elephant, it takes care of it, and sometimes it brings more money. and in a long run, in a short term may not be, but in a long run, because of his identity, the ambience, it not only brings more money to the things. Money is not everything, but I am saying financially it should be a viable project, but sometimes it also helps to change the ambience of the surrounding area. So that is the advantage of the adaptive reuse. But then why? Why we still see that the old structures are being demolished? This is a very recent case in Calcutta, where old Kenilworth Hotel, you can see the news, which is near the crossing. It has its own heritage, it's one of the old hotels there, and which is being demolished. And it is being demolished by a promoter or developer who has purchased and who is building a very high rise structure nearby, and they are demolish it to make a new high rise structure in that area. This was a listed structure, and this I want to bring to your attention, that it was a listed structure. According to the listing, it couldn't be demolished, but what happened is that because of some what should I say, some sort of a inner working, that it was downgraded to a category which allows demolition, and just keeping a sort of a that is in Calcutta this type of grade 3 or grade C, which say that you can demolish the structure, but you can just give a signboard that it was a heritage structure. It is very funny, and that has been done, and its grading has been downgraded. So, and it has become an eye opener. The people are working for that, they are protesting against that, that how this could happen, such an important structure which is a part of the history of Kolkata, and not only a beautiful structure, it has a lot of history. A lot of very famous people came and stayed there over the years, more than 100 years. So, architects now say that let this be an eye opener. Architects wants a strict policy on the heritage building. So, that brings into the focus that not only we should know the means, we should also be sensitive, we should also find out a feasible option, and the people's role, the local people, the conservation architects, the stakeholders, they must form a voice and show people that what are the possibilities of that. So, that is what we call democracy, the participation of the people from the different walks of life into the heritage process. So, this is also an important factor when we are talking about the advocacy, the participation, and making a movement, making people aware that these are the happenings and there are other options like adaptive reuse or infill. So, adaptive reuse options, as we have talked about, there are many good examples where it in a long term it brings a lot of identity, it becomes a very financially viable, it creates a distinct identity, like the ferry terminal. It has not only helped to keep that, but it has got a new life, new meaning, not only to itself, but the entire area. We have talked about the distillery districts. I am sure Srirampur will show a way which is very close to Kolkata, that how this collaborative effort from the practitioners and the people can create a new meaning and give a new life to these heritage structures through adaptive reuse. Thank you.